The group of friends had been looking forward to this hiking trip for months and had planned everything carefully. Kate, Mark, Emily, and Alex were all experienced hikers who loved exploring the great outdoors. They were excited to embark on their next adventure, which would take them deep into a dense forest. After packing their bags with all the necessary gear, food, and water, the group set off on their journey. They drove for several hours until they finally arrived at the edge of the forest, where they parked their car and began their hike. As they entered the forest, the dense foliage enveloped them, and they were immediately surrounded by towering trees, rustling leaves, and chirping birds. The air was fresh and crisp, and the sunlight filtered through the canopy, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. The friends hiked for hours, following a winding trail that led them deeper into the forest. They stopped occasionally to rest, take photos, or admire the scenery. They passed by babbling brooks, cascading waterfalls, and rocky outcroppings, each more breathtaking than the last. As the day wore on, the group realized that they had underestimated the distance they needed to cover to reach their campsite. They began to feel tired and hungry, but they pushed on, determined to reach their destination before nightfall. As the sun began to set, the group finally arrived at their campsite, a clearing beside a serene lake. They quickly set up their tents, started a fire, and cooked a hearty meal. As they sat around the fire, they talked and laughed, sharing stories of their adventures and enjoying each other's company. As the night fell, the forest came alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures. The group settled into their tents, exhausted but content, and fell asleep to the soothing sounds of nature. The next morning they woke up early, refreshed and ready to continue their journey. They packed up their campsite and set off on another day of adventure, excited to see what the forest had in store for them. The friends had started their hike on a clear and sunny day, but as they progressed, the weather began to change. Dark clouds gathered in the sky, and a strong wind picked up. Soon, heavy rain started pouring down, soaking them to the bone. They tried to push on, but the rain grew stronger, and the wind became more intense, making it difficult to see and walk. Realizing that continuing in such weather would be dangerous, the group decided to look for shelter. They searched the surrounding area and soon spotted an old cabin in the distance. They hurriedly made their way towards it, hoping it would provide some respite from the harsh elements. As they approached the cabin, they saw that it was old and run down, with the door hanging off its hinges. Nevertheless, they pushed it open, relieved to find that it was dry inside. The cabin was small, with just one room, but it had a fireplace and a few pieces of furniture, including a table and a couple of chairs. The friends quickly got to work, lighting a fire in the fireplace and drying their clothes. They rummaged through their bags and found some food and water, which they shared while they waited for the storm to pass. The rain pounded against the roof, and the wind howled outside, but they were safe and warm inside the cabin. As they sat around the fire, they talked about their plans for the rest of the trip, and shared stories of other hikes they had been on. They also explored the cabin, finding old books and artifacts that gave them a glimpse into the history of the area. As the night wore on, the storm showed no signs of letting up, and the group decided to spend the night in the cabin. They set up their sleeping bags on the floor and drifted off to sleep, comforted by the crackling fire and the sound of rain on the roof. The eerie shadows cast by the flickering fire seemed to grow longer and darker, and the wind outside howled like a pack of wolves, sending shivers down their spines. The friends could feel a presence in the cabin, something malevolent that seemed to be watching them. Their hearts pounding with fear, the friends huddled together, unsure of what to do. The symbols on the walls seemed to writhe and twist before their very eyes, as if they were alive and trying to warn them of the danger. The longer they stayed in the cabin, the more the fear grew, until it was almost palpable. They could barely hear themselves think over the sound of their pounding hearts and the howling wind outside. When they finally made a hasty exit from the cabin, their relief was palpable. They stumbled blindly through the storm, each of them terrified of what they had experienced in the cabin. Suddenly, a loud, blood-curdling scream pierced through the forest, making them all jump. They knew then that they were being hunted by a malevolent entity, and that it was not going to stop until it had claimed them all. They tried to make a run for it, but every time they tried to leave, they were met with some sort of obstacle, whether it be a fallen tree blocking their path or an impenetrable thicket of brambles. The forest seemed to be alive, and it was working against them. As the night wore on, the friends grew more and more exhausted, and their fear turned into sheer panic. They knew that they were running out of time, that the malevolent entity was closing in on them. But just as they were about to give up hope, they stumbled upon a small clearing in the woods. In the center of the clearing, they saw a strange symbol etched into the ground. They had seen that symbol before, in the cabin where they had taken shelter from the storm. With nothing left to lose, they decided to take a chance and stand on the symbol. Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to shake, and a blinding light engulfed them. A blinding light filled the air, and the entity screeched in pain. It writhed and twisted, unable to withstand the power of the spell. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished into thin air. The friends stood in shock, unable to believe what had just happened. But as the light faded, they saw that they were alone in the forest once more. The malevolent entity was gone. They knew they had to leave the cursed forest as quickly as possible. They followed the path that had opened up before them, determined to find their way out. The forest seemed to be fighting against them at every turn, throwing up obstacles and challenges to slow them down. But the friends pushed on, driven by the desire to escape the cursed forest and put the horror behind them. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they saw a glimmer of light in the distance. They stumbled towards it, their hearts pounding with relief. As they emerged from the forest, they collapsed onto the ground, exhausted and shaken. But they were alive, and they were free from the cursed forest and the malevolent entity that had haunted them. They looked at each other, their eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and fear. They knew that they had narrowly escaped a terrible fate, and they vowed never to return to that cursed place again.